even more sadly, like what are the consequences that happen to men and women, boys and girls, as a result of this very narrow gendered narrative of domestic and intimate partner violence that has essentially left a lot of men vulnerable, locked out in the cold, and a lot of violent women without help either. Like I think they deserve help too, but they have all been hurt and even lost their lives as a result of this cartoonish worldview of gendered violence, male violence, which is only a part of the wider problem.
Hey everybody, how you doing? Welcome back to the Another Nobody podcast with me, your favorite nobody, Travis Myers. Today's guest is George of the Tinmen. George is one of my favorite guests. He's been on the show in the past, and I really like talking to this fella. Today's topic, however, is not so pleasant. It is domestic violence. And there's a bit of a twist to it, though, because we're going to be talking about the little known numbers of just how many men are actually the victims of domestic violence. And I really, really want you to listen to this one because the numbers really did shock me. I was surprised. That's it. Let's get with George. George from the Tin Men. How the hell are you, my friend?
I'm doing great, thanks, Travis. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm so happy you're able to come back. I'm sorry we're going to have, well, another rather sad and dark discussion. You know, last time was men's suicide, and this time is domestic violence, but I'm sure we're going to get a lot of people writing in about this one because there's a bit of a twist to it that a lot of the numbers actually shocked me when it came to domestic violence. And you being my number one numbers guy, I wanted to get with you to see if you could explain them a little bit.
Try my best. Yeah,
Okay. Very, very
sounds good.
good. Um, yeah, now I don't know exactly where you want to start unless I guess we'll just jump right in. And I had seen that, uh, and correct me if I'm wrong, and please go into detail, that in the very, again, sad and dark world of domestic violence, that quite often 51%, at least in Western society, of the victims were actually men.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is about domestic violence is that it's very complicated. Of course, there's obviously different forms of violence. I think the first mistake you've made there is you're conflating domestic violence with intimate partner violence, which is something I often did and I've recently learned not to do. Domestic violence is any violence within a household between, father, son, daughter, mother, sisters, siblings, uncles. It's any violence within a family unit, which is mostly impacting women. It's probably more like 41% of domestic abuse victims are male in England and Wales, at least. Intimate partner violence is what you're talking about there, where that's a lot closer to parity. And in some cases, there are more male victims of intimate partner violence. So CDC data in America from the National Intimate Partner and Sexual Violence Survey, the NISVS, of which the new data is going to be coming out any day now, that finds slightly more men are victims of that on a yearly basis than women, although over a lifetime, women are more likely to experience intimate partner violence. But domestic violence, slightly more women impacted, perhaps 60-40, whereas intimate partner violence is 50-50. But again, that changes. If we're looking at lifetime rates versus annual rates, that change, everything seems to change. And then, of course, you have different forms of sexual violence and different categorizations of sexual violence. And some of them quite literally erase male victimhood. But if we're talking explicitly about intimate partner violence, and if we're looking at the CDC data, and if we're looking at the 12-month prevalence, then yeah, it's about 50-50, maybe 51% men. In England and Wales, we have a crime survey that happens every year by the Office for National Statistics. So government data, it's like the gold standard data. By no means perfect, but it's the best we've got. That found that 51% of intimate partner violence where they're currently in a relationship now, that was men, although slightly less than that for all intimate partner violence, and then slightly less again for domestic violence. So it's very difficult. People use domestic violence and intimate partner violence synonymously, as you have, and I used to, but it's
Yes.
difficult. It's obviously very difficult to make these mistakes.
Yes, yes, and I apologize for that because I do
No,
know the
no.
difference. I do
Yeah.
know the difference, but again, it's for decades of using the same vernacular,
Mm.
domestic violence, which I think, again, the public at large still does. So to clarify, domestic violence is any violence whatsoever that happens within the household,
Yeah.
okay? And I'm sorry, I'm already messing it
Intimate
up.
partner.
Intimate
Intimate partner
partner
violence.
violence is between a husband and a wife, a boyfriend and a girlfriend, or
Mhm.
again, gay and or lesbian couples as well, where they
Mhm.
are intimate partners.
Absolutely. The numbers obviously change. A lot of people talk about intimate partner homicide, which is about three quarters of that are men killing their female partners. But if you look at domestic homicide, which is any family member, it swings a bit closer to 50-50. It's about 60% women or girls being killed, but a lot more males. And that's because sadly, it's a lot more boys being killed. Uh, Often by parents. So
Yes.
it's very difficult. And then even within intimate partner homicide, you have different types of deaths. It's not just partners killing each other. You have corollary victims, which is a member of the family outside of the relationship who's killed, often the child, often the boy. I think it's about 80% males, boys being killed. And then you have police intervention deaths. So someone that's killed as a result of the police being called for whatever reason, that's about 90%, 95% males. You have suicides as a result of intimate partner violence, which is mostly men. And then worst of all, suicide homicides, which is overwhelmingly men. That's where typically a man kills his partner or family member
Yes.
and then himself. So there's so many different bits to it. I'm constantly trying to update my language and see it at highest resolution possible. So it's a learning experience, not just for you, but for me and myself. And I've made the same mistakes as you have, Travis. So no hard feelings. It's an easy
Yes.
mistake to
So
make.
for this show, for the most part, and so our listeners understand, we're talking about intimate partner violence.
Yeah, well, I'm sure we'll talk about all kinds, but I'll try to make explicit what exactly we're talking about, and I'll try
Okay.
not to make a mistake myself.
Very good. Yes, and again, the things that really did surprise me were these numbers because I guess it's just I mean, can I say it's more popular to, blame men,
Yeah,
for this
certainly is.
violence than it is for women because the facts simply don't bear that out, do they?
Yeah, no, I mean, no, and people most violence, at least half of intimate partner violence, doesn't fall into either it's him doing it to her or her doing it to him. It's both partners doing it to one another in what's called bilateral violence. So now
Correct.
we're increasing the resolution even more there, where it's not man versus woman or woman versus man. It's both partners feeding into a cycle of violence that escalates from sort of low level acts of violence and abuse, like maybe someone gets shoved or someone gets yelled at or someone gets slapped and then maybe they'll get punched and then someone might pick up a weapon and that escalates. But if I were to draw a pie chart of all intimate partner violence, slightly more than 50%, around about that, depending on the sample. I mean, it depends on if we're looking at cities or suburbs or schools, colleges, large sample, small sample. It really depends. And then, of course, different countries. But generally, about 50% of all intimate partner violence is bilateral violence. So both partners feeding into it. And then of the other 50%, which is called unilateral or non reciprocal violence, controversially, 70% of that half is women. So women, female to male violence. And then after that, 30% of that half, so 15% overall, if you're following me, that is the male violence stereotype that we see. So that's of all violence, half is a bilateral, half's unilateral, and then of that half, 30% of that is male violence, and then of that wedge, only one quarter of that is severe male violence, which is the type of abuse we talk about most of all. That's where if you did a Google, you're going to see images of that. You'll see a woman cowering in the corner of a black eye, which obviously happens at an alarmingly high rate. But overall, in the grand picture, that's about 5% of all intimate partner violence. So it's complicated. I mean, it gets even more complicated than that, but that's still quite broad brushstrokes and very
Well, it is,
surprising.
as just from what you said right now, you've actually I kinda thought I knew what I was talking about, and now I'm a little bit confused.
Welcome to the
Because
club.
it can be quite complicated, absolutely. Now I could attest, myself, and I won't go into, anecdotes here because I have dozens of them, of my time in the police department, where more often than not, okay? When we would get calls for, a domestic violence call, a domestic, as we would say, which people may not realize too is a very, very common call. In New York
Mm,
City alone, which is when I worked in the Bronx, New York City gets about 600 domestic violence calls a day, okay?
wow.
It's a lot, but it's a very large city, but that is a lot. It's a very, very
Mm.
common call. And I would say the vast majority of domestic violence calls were what you call bilateral. In other
Oh,
words,
really?
both members were taking part in this, and which makes it very, very difficult on our end to decide who is the bad guy, and especially when nobody in the end also wants anybody being arrested
Mm.
during these cases also because there's a whole family dynamic that goes along with it. But that was something that, as a young police officer, um, you think you're there to do the right thing. You're gonna help these women, and it would turn out more often than not that the women, again, who's to blame or who's not to blame, really will always be an unknown since I wasn't there to decide. But it is very obvious that both members in these cases took part in the violence. It was
Mhm.
not one sided. So, and
No.
and that's what we call bilateral, correct?
Yeah, that's bilateral abuse. Sometimes one
Which is
partner's
pretty much a 50-50 type deal,
yeah,
you're saying?
I think so, about 50%, but it's again, it's very muddled. Some people would argue, well, it's one partner, self-defense, and the other partner is the instigator. Sometimes that's true, sometimes it's not. I know people will say a stat, well, 50% of violence against 50% of violence by women is self-defense. And I think that's probably true, but guess what? The other 50% is not self-defense. That's them instigating the violence. I don't think people
Correct.
realize what they're actually saying by saying that 50% of violence is self-defense and 50% isn't. So it's complicated. What isn't complicated is the fact that anyone can be a victim of intimate partner violence, male or female, girl, boy, woman, man, anyone can be a victim. We can argue about how that pie chart breaks down, but anyone can be a victim. And but the sad thing is, the very little support for male victims. I still struggle to find any specialist services, shelters, especially in America. I think I hear there's only two male shelters in all of North America for male victims, like specialist
Wow.
services. A lot of men will get sent to like a homeless shelter, which of course is not appropriate for someone that's being abused. But you can probably count on one hand how many abuse shelters there are. I think one's in
I can
Texas.
honestly say I've never heard of a men's shelter in
Mm,
America, or in New York anyway.
no,
Does one exist? Very possibly, but I've never heard of it.
I
So,
doubt it.
yeah.
And then the sad thing is, there's a interesting stat where men and women being killed in intimate partner relationships was sort of happening at similar rates until about the 1970s, early to mid 1970s in America. And then rates of men being killed came down to where they are today, where male partners are about one in four victims. And people have been scratching their heads as to why did that drop off? Why has women's rates continued to go up of being killed by their partners and male rates came down? And why did it diverge so suddenly in the 1970s? One theory put forward called battered husband syndrome was because in the 70s, women's shelters opened up and it was by breaking that cycle of violence and allowing women to get out of the abusive home and escape. They didn't have to resort to killing their husbands in so-called self-defense. So, in that theory, highly controversial, counterintuitively, it was women's shelters that saved men's lives. So, I would argue that would opening shelters for men save women? I don't know, but I think the most important thing is breaking that cycle of violence. And often men can't break it because there's nowhere for them to go. Like you said, there's no shelters, and definitely not in New York. Arguably anywhere, most states probably don't have a single shelter for men. So what are they going to do? They're going to have to stay at home within that cycle of violence, which escalates and escalates and escalates, and often does lead to serious violence or worse, death. So that's why we need to treat the problem from both sides. They have to solve the equation from both sides. And anything less than that is not a complete solution, in my view.
No, well, I'd have to agree with that. And it also, the little story you just told there, kind of proves that removing one partner, even if it's temporarily, putting them in a shelter, stops the violence. It stops the again, the reciprocal violence. It stops the back and forth. And sometimes they just need a break, you know? Be it, hours, days, weeks, whatever it is, they need a break. Excuse me, to keep it from continuing and or getting
Mhm.
worse.
Mhm. And not just shelters, but just services like phone lines for women that are being abused are absolutely essential. Of course, they help the woman directly, but they also help de-escalate the violence, which will save the man too.
And
So,
why do you think I mean, why have men been left out in the cold in this particular situation?
well, I mean, highly controversial again. I mean, it's going into conspiratorial territory now, but the way in which domestic violence funding happens in America and in the UK, to be honest, is it's very much centered around a gendered model of domestic violence, intimate partner violence, where they seem to think it is purely men doing it onto women. They don't see male victimization or certainly not female violence. So they wouldn't, why would they provide a service to something that they don't even think exists? And the money has been sort of held onto by a lot of sort of large violence against women and girls charities that don't want to share the money and are perpetuating this idea of male only violence, whereas male only violence certainly exists, but again, that's part of a much more detailed picture, and they don't want to share the money. I mean, I asked Erin Pizzey, who opened the first refuge in the world for women, why are there no shelters for men? And she just said money. They don't want to share the money.
And
It's simple as that.
she is a very interesting character. I think I know the woman you're talking about. She's older now, correct?
Oh, she's 86. To be
She's
honest,
a
she's in,
she's yes, she's older now.
yeah, yeah.
And she had the first shelter in the world, and did she not she wanted to do both men and women, did she not?
Yeah, so it wasn't even a shelter, to be honest. It was just essentially a squat, a sort of derelict building that she had men in the neighborhood fix up. And then she fixed it up and it became like a community center. And then she just started taking women who were trying to escape abusive relationships. Almost immediately, that house was full. So then she went to the next derelict building down the road, squatted, fixed it up, brought the women in, filled it up, next building, squatted, bringing in men from the neighborhood to do fix things for her, and she basically ran not only the first domestic violence shelter in the world, but also the largest squatting organization in the UK. And she took over whole streets. She actually had a hotel at one point. She had about
Wow.
50 or so suites on en suite sort of hotel rooms full of women and children. And then, yeah, the first thing she noticed almost on the first day was that a lot of the women coming to her were themselves violent too. She polled the first 100 women and found 62 of them were at least as violent as the men they were leaving. So straight
Correct.
away, she was like, I'm seeing this bilateral abuse. The solution surely is to open a shelter for men. And that's where she ran into trouble because as soon as she started talking about women as being violent too, a lot of the support she was given, some of the funding she received, which wasn't very much, just drove her, disappeared. And a lot of the men who were signing checks to keep her going, well, I'm not going to sign a check for that. And she went from being a national hero to being public enemy number one. And she had her life sort of torn apart. She would get picketed and harassed, and she had a police escort in the end because she would travel the country talking to people, had a bomb squad going through her mail, and eventually she had to flee the country. She was literally afraid for her life. And then her refuge became Refuge UK, which is now the biggest domestic violence charity on the planet. And they don't talk about her. They don't want to hear about her. They don't want to hear her name. She's like in the shadow of the domestic violence industry. I'm uh, lucky enough to have met her and interviewed her a couple of times. And she's just one of the most incredible women you could ever hope to meet. Like so extraordinarily brave. The only mistake she made was saying, "I want to help men too," and that was it.
And that's such a really simple thing to say, you
Mhm.
know? And by
Yeah.
helping men too, you're helping the family as a whole, the couple as a whole, society as a whole. Here's a woman that should be really considered a hero,
Mm.
especially, in the woman's rights movement, if you will, you know? Um, but because she wasn't strictly woman's rights, she was, turned into an outcast.
Yeah. I mean, no
And she
one
did
really knows
eventually
her
did she
name.
leave the country also in the end?
She left the country. I think she moved to Mexico and became an author, still writing about domestic violence. She also wrote the first book on domestic violence. She was the one that took domestic violence out from closed doors and put it into the public spotlight and said, "This is a real issue. We need to be talking about this." So yeah, opened the first shelter, set up the first charity, wrote the first book on domestic violence, and she's helped thousands of women and children and men. Like there was no one on planet Earth with more first-hand experience than Erin Pizzey, and she absolutely would say to you that it's not gendered, and she calls the gendered model of domestic violence the great lie. And yeah, she said it's all down to money. They don't want to share the money. And then the woman who usurped her out of her own charity, who went on to become CEO, she paid herself hundreds of thousands of pounds over the years, and she's now a dame. Like she's a national hero, or at least seen as one. And Erin is living on income support in a single bed flat, uh, and she's a very happy woman. But I don't think it's fair that considering what she did, she should everyone in the country should know her name. So I love bringing her up on podcasts because hopefully people go and Google Erin Pizzey and read a little bit about her extraordinary story, which is truly like world leading. It's the greatest story never told, in my opinion.
Yes.
And what a brilliant woman! What a role model for everyone.
And this all falls down to, um, and I hate to belittle it, but I guess I will, to basically feminist politics. Am I right
Yeah,
there? That's
she
what
would say
that's
that.
what
Yeah.
shut her out, because although she was doing this phenomenal, phenomenal work for women, the
Mhm.
fact that she wanted to include men made her a pariah.
Yeah, and it wasn't just men. It was just she wanted to talk about what she called interactive violence, another word for bilateral violence, where it's both partners being violent to one another in an interactively violent relationship. And she would say it's not a gendered issue; it's a generational issue. It's something that's passed down through families. It's something children often learn in a as they're growing up, because often those who are violent themselves have experienced violence, often
Of
from
course.
parents. And she would say that's the real cause. The issue is we need to teach children that violence isn't an answer to anything, and stop seeing us as a black and white, green, blue team versus red team issue. It's everyone can experience violence from, the working class right up to the royal family, and we
Absolutely.
need to break that cycle, and stop it from transcending down generation after generation after generation. So it's a generational issue. It's a cyclical issue. It's something that happens between all families in many different ways, but it's not a gendered issue in the way that people often describe as.
And now that you brought up Erin Pizzey for one, because she had been doing this, decades and decades ago. What was this, like the 50s, 60s that she started?
1971, she opened the
Oh,
first refuge, I
1971.
think.
Okay, so later
Mm,
than I thought. All right.
mm,
But, to much of your research, so when we go on to this and people think, here are two men talking bad about women in domestic violence, okay, and bringing to light the fact that it quite often is a two-way street,
mm,
much of the time,
mm,
um, but that you get your numbers. You are basically a numbers and statistics guy. I don't want to belittle what you're doing, but this is your realm, and your research, if I'm correct, is on this subject in particular is over like 1,700 different pieces of paper that you have, and dozens of different or other professionals, scientists, academics, et cetera, that have gone through all of this stuff, and you are extrapolating their statistics and their numbers and bringing them
mm.
to light, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I don't do the research, but I'm lucky enough that a lot of people send me their research, and then I extrapolate it into various different infographics and carousels or documentaries, films, and whatever else through social media. I guess I wasn't originally a statistics guy, but I learned to understand the stats and try to present them as fairly as possible. But what you're talking about, the 1,700 papers,
Well,
that's
well,
the
but mostly, I think I don't want to interrupt you. I'm sorry, George, but I think my point that I'm making now is that the research that you are putting forward, much of this stuff was done 20, 30, 40 years ago, 50 years ago. There's nothing new about it. The fact of it is, though, is that for the last, well, if it was as far as Aaron Pitzke goes, that's 55 years ago now, you know?
yeah, yeah. I
And
interviewed
for
her
the
on
most part, the bilateral violence has continually been swept under the rug.
yes, to put it mildly. I mean, Erin Pizzey isn't the only expert who's saying this. There was another expert who I also talk a lot about, who's no longer with us, called Professor Murray Strauss.
Yes, I
Murray
know him, yes.
Strauss, he is
And
the
he works with
the
a guy named Giles or Giles, something like that?
Richard Yellis, yeah, Professor
Ellis.
Richard
I'm
Yellis.
way off with the name there.
And he was also a leading expert. He was doing some of the earliest studies ever done into partner violence. Susan Steinmetz as well, doing incredible work. She did the first studies into violence against male partners, I believe. And one of the things they all have in common, sadly, is they were all given death threats. They were all having their careers sort of destroyed. Susan Steinmetz actually had a bomb threat called
Yes,
into her
yes,
daughter's wedding for simply
yes,
talking about male victims of abuse, which doesn't do much to disprove violence by women. If you're calling in with a bomb threat, it's sort of making a point in many ways.
yes,
Murray Strauss had it too. They were librarians refusing to show up his books, people walking out of presentations when he gave speeches, death threats too. Richard Yellis had the same. People planting rumors about Murray Strauss being some sexual predator towards his PhD students. All of it is made up. A concerted effort to hide the truth, and he kept putting it out there regardless. So I know he put together analysis of 200 studies reaching back 30 years, which he published in 2010. So we're talking 1980s. And he was finding studies as far back as 1980 that were showing gender symmetry, intimate partner violence, victimization rates. So it's not a new thing. It's only new because people are able to share the data that's always existed, such as myself and others. It's been like this for decades, many decades. Like Erin saw it in 1971 straight away. The
yeah.
difference is now it's finally getting out there, and we're starting to understand like what's been going on. Even more sadly, like what are the consequences that happen to men and women, boys and girls, as a result of this very narrow gendered narrative of domestic and intimate partner violence that has essentially left a lot of men vulnerable, locked out in the cold, and a lot of violent women without help either. Like I think they deserve help too, but they have all been hurt and even lost their lives as a result of this cartoonish worldview of gendered violence, male violence, which is only a part of the wider problem.
Yes, sir, I agree. I agree wholeheartedly so far. We're going to take a real quick break right now, my friend, and we're going to come back and dive a little deeper into this, okay? 2 minutes, everybody.
Hey, crime fans!
Join us October 9th through 11th at
Crime Story Fest
Crime Story Fest.
Crime Story Fest.
at the Doubletree Hilton on Boston's North Shore, Danvers, Massachusetts location.
Crime Story Fest. All things crime and mystery festival.
Come visit us at Crime Story Fest.
What else you got going on? What, you gonna watch another documentary on Netflix? Come on down to Crime Story Fest. Enjoy yourself. Have a good time. Meet some of your favorite podcasters, authors, experts. This October, Boston, be there. Hey, how you doing? It's me again, another nobody, Travis Myers. And today we're going to talk whiskey. I know most of you think of me as an all-American patriotic type guy, and you are right. But when it comes to whiskey and drinking whiskey, which I do, I always go for the Irish stuff. And my choice when it comes to the Irish stuff is Powers Irish Whiskey. Established back in 1791, it's a triple distilled, oak-aged whiskey. Powers is simply magic. It also happens to be the #1 selling whiskey in Ireland, which has got to say something, because if it's good enough for the Irish, it's good enough for you. So the next time you raise a glass, fill it with Powers, and think of me, another nobody, Travis Myers. This is a 2024 American Eagle gold coin, which I bought along with several others last year. I'm very happy to report that its value has gone up over 40% in the first year. See, I was encouraged to buy some gold by a financial advisor friend who suggested I be more diversified with my investments. She said gold and silver was a very safe place to park some money, as well as a good hedge against inflation. So I took her advice, and all I can say is I wish I had bought more, as it's been so very, very good to us so far. Now, I purchased these gold coins from the good people over at stackingboise.com, who could not have been nicer, more knowledgeable, or more helpful. Now, I'm certainly no financial expert, but I will say from experience, if you're looking to make an investment, buy yourself some gold. And some real gold that you could hold in your hand, just like this coin you see here. And if you do, then do like I did and get with the good folks over at stackingboise.com. I'm telling you, they're good people, they took good care of me, and they'll take good care of you. Again, that's stackingboise.com. And hey, tell them Travis sent you. All right, everybody, we are back with my good friend here, George of the Tinmen, and we're talking about, again, the dark world of, well, not just domestic violence, but why do I keep getting this one mixed up
Intimate
today?
partner violence.
Intimate partner violence, correct, which again is mainly couples violence.
I
Go
mean,
ahead.
you could say domestic violence because domestic violence does include intimate partner violence, but intimate partner violence is a subset of domestic violence.
Correct. Um, we've talked a little bit now about, well, predominantly the bilateral cases, which is, I would imagine, is the bulk of it, and by the time it becomes known to the police or known to the public, it is predominantly is bilateral violence. However, I want to talk a little bit about non-reciprocal violence, where there is only one partner in play. Okay,
Mhm.
and that was a number again that just shocked the shit out of me. I mean, again, being a seasoned guy, a police officer that's have seen this over and over again, has spent a number of years, owning pubs where, you become quite intimate with the public at large, especially the neighborhoods that you work in. But what shocked me is when I saw that 70% of non-reciprocal violence is perpetrated by women. And I
Mhm.
really, even right now, discussing it with you and knowing it to be fact, it blows my mind. It really does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, the thing is, you as a police officer, you obviously have a lot of first-hand experience, but there's a lot that happens that filters male victims out of your experiences. Like we know that a male victim of abuse is less likely to acknowledge what's happening to him as abuse. So he won't see violence as domestic violence. He'll just see it as part of being in a relationship, or at least he's more likely to see that.
Yes.
Some women do that too, but men are more likely. And then even if they do acknowledge the violence against them by a partner, they're less likely to call the police. So they're less likely to call you. I think they're about 2 or 3 times less likely to report abuse to the police, often because they feel mistreated by the police. I know. I mean, I know
Two to
this missed
three times.
2 to 3 times more. Off the top of my head, I think it's about 20%. Only about 20% of male victims call the police, and about 50% of abused women call the police. So there's a huge cohort of women that don't call the police as well,
Yes.
but an even bigger cohort of men. And a lot of that's because of the way a lot of men are treated by the police, they find unfair. I mean, I know I interviewed on my podcast someone called Professor Don Dutton, who's probably, now Maurice Strauss has died, Don is probably the main expert, the primary expert in all of North America on family violence. And he was telling me about a story that he was writing about where a man was stabbed by his wife, and the police turned up after he called the police, and the police took him to hospital, had the knife removed from his stomach. They were still there, and once the knife was removed, they arrested him. So it's wild. That's obviously an extreme example, but it's often the man who's arrested by the police, even if he's the victim.
Yes.
And that's largely down to the police training. And I'm not trying to cast police in a negative light because they're trained with
Well,
these gendered models too.
I can say for myself, okay? And again, my time, 30 years ago was a bit different than it is today. They
Mm,
have new things, what came out during my time was one was a DIR, which was a domestic incident report, and which had to be taken at all domestic calls. Something that I don't know if I actually really agree with or believe in, because I think it does create a record of non-criminal activity that is, again, between you and your spouse or your significant other that really I don't think is police business, to be honest. And that's
Mm,
just me being a man and thinking privately that I would not want to be involved in something of that nature. I never liked taking them myself. Um, but stories that, again, when we had discretion, we also have a new thing now. They have a new thing, I should say, since I'm long gone, called must arrest situations, where when you show up and violence is present, you absolutely must arrest somebody, which again, I don't think is always the right answer because it quite often can make things worse and hurt families in many different reasons. For instance, people have to go to work the next day. You may now lose your job. The breadwinner may lose their job if they're taken off to jail, you know? And I'm not
mm,
talking about extreme cases where people have broken noses or are bloodied up, or like your story you just said, somebody's actually stabbed. I'm talking about
mm,
simple domestic incidences where the police are called. And as we said earlier, this happens 600 times a day in New York City. Okay. But quite often, what we would do, okay, when we would show up, have a discussion with both parties, try to ascertain some sort of truth, which you will never get because both, everybody's spirits are high, and people are very upset and nobody ever tells the truth. So we have to ascertain that ourselves. But a very common thing would be to take the man's apartment keys, house keys, whatever, say, take a walk, pal, give them to the wife and or girlfriend, let them in when you feel safe. And that was the end of it. All right.
mm.
And that might sound bizarre to a lot of people, but it was a way to quell the situation and not make it worse in the end by taking somebody off to jail.
Look,
Okay.
yeah, I guess the problem with policing is that you end up attending situations which you're not really appropriate for. I mean, if it was down to me, I would put a lot more money into domestic abuse services for both men and women, and they're the ones who should be called, and they're the ones that should be turning up, not the police making arrests, because that's not really what you're there for.
Not our job.
Well,
No.
it's sort of a waste of your time in many ways. So I can see why there are arrests because there are no services, and you're the best they've got in many ways. So I can see why
Well,
they would
then,
call.
then you're in a situation too with back to the DIR, the domestic incident report, and social services in general. We're talking about people that are just so wildly overworked,
Mm,
in a situation where not only and I don't want to say that they don't care, but they have a stack of files, from their desk up to the ceiling as far as social workers. And you have couples who don't want to be helped.
mm,
People don't realize that either. By the time somebody's on their way to the hospital, this has probably been going on for much, if not all of their relationship, you know,
mm,
and it builds and builds and builds and builds. And there's no easy answers. We can say everybody needs help, and yes, they most certainly do. But the fact of the matter is, getting help has to be a personal decision. You have
mm,
to want help in order to achieve it, because if you the victim and or the perpetrator, if neither one of you are looking for help, it's not coming. The police can't do anything for you. And it's not the police job, and it's not, in the end, it's not really the social worker's job and or you know the city council's job or the mayor's job that you can't take care of your own situation. I'm not, again, blaming the victim at all, but the reality of it is things do tend to accelerate and spiral out of control if they're not attended to. But if nobody wants them to be attended to, they're not going to be attended to. Was I clear on that, or did I kind of go off on a
Well, I
tangent?
mean, I'm very aware that I don't have the first-hand experiences as you do, Travis. It's difficult for me to comment on it, but I do think there should be some tailored services that anyone in an abusive relationship should be able to call. I don't think the police are the right people to do that because they're not essentially qualified, but some sort of support service, ultimately couples therapy would be good, or just to end the relationship. But it's obviously easier said than done.
Oh, yes,
But
yes,
I feel like there has to be someone to call, but I'm not qualified. This is like
yeah,
sort of well outside my remit now. I'm not
yeah,
sure what help would meaningfully work. But the interventions I have seen are so often again following this gendered narrative, where the man is supported, not the man is treated for violence to try and reduce the violent behaviour, but the woman is not treated for violence at all. So you're not actually
yes.
solving the problem. The cycle continues. He has to go back to the home, and guess what? The violence continues again. Um, I don't know, but
Now let me
the
let,
solution is I don't know.
Let me
Go
ask you
on.
this. I'll start with another. You should be doing the talking, but I'll give you another little anecdote here of things that I've seen in the past, and then I want to ask you maybe a little bit about. I don't know if the maybe the word is entitlement. I don't know, but I can speak about two young women that I know personally very well. Both work for me. One in New York and one in Connecticut, in two different pubs that I owned. Um, Both very small, attractive young ladies. They were bartenders that work for me. 110, 120 pounds. If you looked at them, they just, you know, they look like little college girls. They're both in their 30s, but they, very young, attractive little barmaids, all right?
Mm.
Who would regularly punch around their boyfriends. And I mean to the point where we would see their boyfriends with black eyes and with broken lips, you know, marks on their faces. Uh, Never were the police involved, never the police called. The men went along with this. They accepted this, as you said before, as part of their relationship. Were they, you know, shame on them, too manly to contact authorities? Were they so in love that they were blinded? Did they think, well, we're men, we have to accept this? Um, all of these things may be true, okay? Because again, relationships are so varied and so different and, personal to each group. But is there also for women in particular of this age group, I'm talking about millennials or now Zoomers who are becoming of age, that that they are more entitled to this sort of behavior, and that's why the rate of 70% is so high? Or do we think that it has always been 70%? Decades ago, maybe in the 40s or 50s, where a man could backhand his wife if she was out of line, and nobody would ever say this. I'm not condoning that, don't get me wrong, but do we think that these current numbers of 70% show a more entitled female because of the more modern wave of feminism? I'm sorry, go ahead.
I mean, I think we
I know I threw a
definitely
lot at you there, but go ahead.
we definitely seem to normalize violence by women towards men a lot more readily than we do the opposite. And then there's a famous my friend who runs a charity called Mankind, which is the only nationwide service for male victims of abuse in the UK. They did a really famous viral advert on YouTube, and you can go and see it. And it's essentially the first half is a man. Both actors are not real people, but they're both walking through a busy part of London, and then having an argument. And then he's like pushing her. I think he grabs her by the throat and puts her against the fence, and he's yelling at her. He's basically abusing her, but they're
Yes,
actors. It's not real. Then within seconds, as you'd expect, all of the public are running over to help. Like, what are you doing? Pulling him off of her, helping protect the woman. Rightly so. And then the next scene, they must have shot it the next day, but in the exact same space, they do the same thing, but the roles are reversed, where she's acting aggressively, she's shouting, she hits him in the face, she grabs him by the throat. Exactly the same, no less violent, and people are laughing. People are like, like, ooh, that's so embarrassing. No one helps, that's for sure. And then that it turns this whole idea of normalization of male violence on its head, because although there is a certain element of normalization, the normalization of women's violence towards men is even greater. I think that explains why a lot of this female violence goes unchecked, to the point of that it, in some data, like you said, exceeds male unilateral violence, to the point where we don't see it as a problem. Like, I remember when I was a kid, I had it drilled into my head from the earliest possible age: you never hit a woman. You never hit
yes,
a woman. You never hit
yes.
a woman. And good. I'm glad. I would never hit anyone. I never have. But I didn't see my sister being taught those lessons. Never hit a man, never hit a man. And I know I've talked a lot about this so-called power disparity of physical strength in relationships. And someone said to me, it's not about who's stronger, it's about who's willing to use that strength against the other. And I don't think men are going to be hitting women in violent relationships with their full strength as often as women are in reverse. Because I'm sure the woman probably feels that she's fighting for her life. And sadly, often she probably is. But it's not as simple as to say, well, he's stronger, therefore he's the winner and she's weaker, she's the perpetual victim. It's a lot more complicated than that. And I think people not seeing that in the way that you should be seeing it leads to a lot of violence by women being unchecked or being quite literally laughed at, as the
Yes.
advert I mentioned.
Well, that's what I kinda mean about the entitlement,
Hmm.
where we have again, well, back to the examples that I just gave you about the 2 girls that work for me who used to beat their boyfriends up on a regular basis. Only once did I have another female bartender that worked for me. And, you become close. You get to know these people personally because they work for you. You see them all the time.
Mm,
And she was in a bad relationship. And I'm not going to say shame on me. I did the right thing. I called a detective that I knew to come in from the precinct and talk to this girl, you know, uh, uh, try to help her out, try to guide her in some direction, tell her that, what can you do to help this girl? I did not do this for those 2 men that I knew that were getting punched around
mm,
by their girlfriends.
mm,
All right. And again, shame on me, but I am a creature of society, as we all are. And in my mind, I still can't say, well, what the hell is wrong with these guys? And I almost, smile or snicker about it myself. These jokers are getting punched around by these little 110-pound girls, you know? And there's
mm,
nothing funny about it. It's sad and shame on me, and I should be ashamed of myself for not caring about these men, but I didn't bother to get involved for them. Where I was
mm.
worried about this other young woman, and I personally made a phone call to a friend to come and talk to her. Do you see? And so are these is this have we in society empowered women to be more violent? And that's why that non-reciprocal violence is 70%. Again, a shocking number to me on the woman's side. Please, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, and it's definitely. I've seen some data where it's called. I think it's called the generational shift. I can bring it up in a minute, but I found that as boomer women have not been shown to have the same rates of physical violence, intimate partner violence, and sexual violence as millennial women. So it does seem to be a shift where, and that just seems to be part of autonomy. Like if we're lifting up women's autonomy, which is obviously the right thing to do, some women will exercise that autonomy to be violent towards the male partner. I mean, that's just quite literally what autonomy is. It's your choice to do what you want with your life. Not
Yes,
all women are good people, just like men. Some of them are going to be violent without autonomy. But when you were talking about the normalization of violence in your experience in New York, I think it just reminded me of a episode of Friends, obviously set in New York. Don't know if you remember it, but I remember Joey, who's probably the biggest of all the characters, a big burly guy. He is in a relationship with a little tiny girl, a bit like you described, little tiny woman, and she like punches him in the arm, and it's like it's framed in a way that's humorous, where
yes.
every time she meet him, she'd punch him in the arm like quite hard, in a seemingly playful way, and he found it very painful to the point where the joke was he'd wear lots and lots of jumpers. He'd have to wear more and more jumpers
I
as the
remember the
episode.
episode now, yes.
And I was like, I don't know if you'd have that storyline, the opposite, where he's punching her and she's waiting. I don't think that'd be funny. And that was interesting. Like thinking about episode now, I'm sure I laughed and probably would laugh again. And it was framed. It had a canned laughter and it was humorous and it was like, oh, but that did feel a bit odd in hindsight now, thinking about that episode. And I don't know if it would be as funny if it was Ross punching Rachel in the exact same way.
Correct.
But with her, because of the so-called power dynamic, it was sort of laughed off. And in many ways, that is a power in its own right. To have your acts of violence minimized and laughed away is also power, just of a different kind. Yeah, well, it's interesting because obviously based in New York as well. And I was like, and she's also quite a petite woman, and Joey's a big guy. But you can see how in real life, where it's not a rom com, that sort of violence towards a man, a big man by a small woman, would be not seen as a serious thing, and certainly not as serious as if it was the other way around.
Yes. No, absolutely. Now, do you have any just because we touched on it, I'm curious now, is any of your data generation based?
Maybe I'll bring it up for you.
I mean,
Yeah.
that's something that I would be curious now too. Are boomers and, um, what do you call it, Gen Xers like myself, do we tend to be less violent? Do we keep it in the closet more? Um or again, back to what I'm and I might be saying it wrong, but the entitlement that I may see in women today that they think it's perfectly okay I mean, I can relate this to other, times, especially working in bars and nightclubs outside of the police department,
Mm.
where quite often bar fights, even though it ends up being the 2 men on the sidewalk punching each other's brains out, are more often than not instigated by loud and violent, drunk young women.
Yeah. I mean,
I mean, it's a
the date.
fact. There's no getting around that. Go ahead.
I've seen that too. I'm reading a study now from 2021 that looked at about 1,500 participants. Half of them were baby boomer slash Gen X, and then half of them millennials, which is, I guess, my generation. And it found exactly as you described. It's a bit like an X, where this is the percent of women and men who have used pressure or force to have sexual contact with a male partner, and 8.5% of Gen X slash baby boomer men said yes, and 4.2% of baby boomer women said yes. And then that sort of flipped to, so millennial women 10% and millennial men 5.82%. And there's various different, I'm looking at it now, various different instances of that, mostly sexual contact. Have you used emotional coercion in post-refusal sexual persistence? So someone that's trying to coerce a partner after having said no into having sex. Same again, where 28.4% of baby boomer men, Gen X men, said yes, so nearly 30%. Just 7% of baby boomer Gen X women said yes. And again, it sort of flips where the male drops down to 19% from 28%, and the Gen X woman goes from 7% to nearly 14%. So not quite the same, but the gap is massively, the male rate's coming down, the female rate's going up. A lot of that just could be because of we're educating men more. Not enough, because there's still 20% of men doing it, but it's fewer, and then the women's has gone up. And then, yeah, it's all basically the data seems to be saying that from this particular
So
study.
men in general are
Getting better?
rates of domestic abuse are going down where women are rising. And that
In
is,
that
again,
particular study,
by generation.
by generation, and
Interesting.
there's loads of ways you can speculate upon it. It reminds me of another study I saw recently that found it was basically about rape myths, people that hold on to like antiquated ideas of rape. And the rape myth they were looking at was men enjoy being raped by women, which is obviously not true. I mean, I know men who have been raped by women and they certainly didn't enjoy it. But they polled men in, I think, 1985, men and women in 1985, and they polled them again in 2019. And it was shocking. It was the same swing. I think off the top of my head, 45% of men in 1985 felt a man enjoyed being raped, and only 5% of women of that generation said men enjoyed being raped. And then they asked the same student, well, not same university students of a different generation, the same question in 2019. And the, the women had gone to 25%, so 5 times more believed that a man enjoys being raped. And the man had dropped from maybe 45% down to about 5 or 6%. So they had
Right.
dropped like tenfold, and the women's had gone up by 5 times. 5% of women in 1985 held on to that myth, and now 25%. So it was like another X. That's obviously controversial. Although that doesn't surprise me, because like I said, I was taught from a young age by my parents and school peers never to hit a woman.
Yes.
And I don't think girls are given those lessons, and they ought to. They really, really ought to. It reminds me of Don Dutton, again, who I interviewed. I asked him about the normalization of violence, and he was talking about a poll of Americans. And I think about 4% of Americans think it's okay to hit your wife. And 12% of Americans, off the top of my head, said it's okay for a wife to hit her husband. So significantly higher. And he was saying 4% is like similar to people who think they've been abducted by aliens. So you're always going to get a
Correct.
very low percentage. But 4% is almost as good as zero in that sense. But it's certainly less than 12%. And I think we know that's right. I think if we'd walk the street and you would see a man hit a woman, we would respond a lot differently than
Absolutely.
if she hit. And I think we just know that.
Absolutely.
And that that research didn't surprise me. And it's
No,
interesting how,
I have been guilty of the same, where I have witnessed, not as, a working police officer at the time, but walking down the street of New York City, working in bars and nightclubs, I have witnessed men put their hands on women and have always jumped in,
mm,
or you quite often half the bar stands up, or other people on the sidewalk will stand up and stick up for the woman,
good. Yeah.
happens. I have never seen it for the man.
Mm,
We walk by, and again, shame on us, we might even snicker a little bit when we see
mm,
some poor guy getting slapped around by a woman. and I've seen it. I have physically seen it, and never would I think to intercede because I think, it's none of my business. As
Mm.
opposed to when it happens to a woman, I want to make sure she's not getting hurt.
I mean, I've definitely seen situations where I've seen a young woman screaming in her presumably boyfriend's face, where I've even said to the person I'm with, like, if that was the other way around, I would definitely have to do something. And even for me, knowing about these double standards and who I am posting my content, even I didn't do anything to stop it from happening. Even I'm aware of this double standard, I still didn't do anything. I like to think if she had hit him, I would have done something, but she was definitely behaving in a way that I would not have accepted that if he was doing the same to her.
Now, do you
But
think that there is
mm,
because there is a sexual divide, okay, that I think it's absolutely part of our DNA, okay? Again, I know I think we talked the last time that you and I got together where I said, I am certainly a women and children first kind of guy. I can't help that. That's the way I see the world and that's the way I was raised. But I think that it is deeper. I think it is in, again, part of our DNA. But do you think that there's how do I want to put this? Do you think that there's a part of us, okay, men in particular, where we are more protecting of women? I know we're talking about
mm,
domestic violence here, where men are hitting women and women are hitting men, but there's a part of us that is more protecting of women, and therefore we protect them even when they're at their worst.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that's one of the reasons why. That's definitely one of the reasons why you asked me why is there such a high rate of unilateral violence by women, and a lot of it's because the man they're beating up is accepting it. He doesn't want to fight back, mainly because he just want to hurt her. Also because he's afraid that she'll call the police with a black eye, even though it was actually self-defense. But also just because he doesn't want to hurt her, because he's been taught those things, never hit a woman, even if she's beating the shit out of you. I remember, I think it was like some American talk show host where a guy was getting beaten up. It was Dr. Phil, that guy. And
Mhm.
he was saying you can never hit a woman, even if she's beating you up, even if she's being violent, you have to just take it. And I was just like, that is a terrible advice. I would say definitely just move her away, like push her back and then get out of the room. And he was like, no,
We
you just have to
absolutely.
accept it. Never hit a woman, even if she's being violent towards you. I was just like, that is crazy. And then I've seen other talk show hosts where they're laughing at the man. I remember one guy got locked out on the balcony all night. I think he was wearing like just his boxers. He jumped off the balcony to try and escape and broke his ankle. Audience laughing at him.
Yes.
And then the host, to his credit, said, if that was the girlfriend that was locked out on the balcony and she was so afraid that she jumped out and broke her leg, we wouldn't be laughing. And then
Not
everyone
one bit.
stopped laughing. And I think that was great job. Yeah, I think we are protective of women more than we are of men. That's not to say there isn't a normalization of violence against women too. I'm not trying to say that's not a problem. It is, but we just respond differently. I also think of like when a man has committed a horrible sexual crime against a woman, if and when he's sent to prison, there's a reason why he's isolated. Because if you're a rapist in prison, you're going to get the shit kicked out of you. Like
Yes.
they're the people they go for. They're the
Yes.
reasons why they go for it because you're seen as the lowest of the low. And even in prison, where some might argue those are, the men that are most violent, they're the so-called evil men, which I don't think that's true. But even if you do think that way, they're still beating the shit out of rapists because they hate them. They don't accept them. You're not accepted
Yes.
if you're a rapist in prison. Far from it. They literally have to separate you out to stop you from being killed. Whereas violence against men in prison, which is male prisoners are the number one victim of sexual violence in America, we laugh about it. We think it's hilarious. Don't drop the soap. Ha 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 ha.
Yes.
And
Yes.
there's, again, like a massive double standard there. And yeah, if we normalize male violence, and surely that rapist going to prison would be celebrated and welcomed and treated as a hero, but he's not, and far from it, and rightly so.
Yes, I can concur with all of that. Absolutely,
Mm,
absolutely. So, yeah, these numbers are really are shocking. Something I'm gonna throw at you too, all right, that comes to women, and it's something that again, surprised me when I came across these numbers. Um, and it has to do with women in particular, but, when it comes to the 3 different categories of couples here, where we have lesbians, heterosexuals, and gay men,
mhm,
okay? the most violent statistically, as far as couples, tend to be lesbian couples, where it's something like 43 to 45% of violence appears among these couples. Heterosexuals land in the middle, where it's like 30 to 34% experience some sort of violence or domestic abuse. And gay men have the least at 16 to 20%,
Mm.
which almost, and I'm not trying to make a joke out of it, although I can see how a lot of people might think it's funny, but it almost seems if you remove women from the
Yeah.
relationship,
Fewer
the
women,
violence
lesser the
drops
violence.
dramatically. The violence drops dramatically. And
Yeah.
back to the idea that are men simply greater protectors than women? I mean, I hate to say that because I mean, again, I had a great mother. My wife is a great mother. I love my daughters, et cetera, et cetera. But it just seems to me these numbers are wild to me, man. They really are, and nobody's talking about them. That's the thing that gets me the most is that nobody talks about them.
Well, because we heard what happened to Erin Pizzey and
Yes,
Susan Steinmetz and Murray Strauss. They had their lives threatened. No, credible threats. You don't get a police escort for no reason, and that's why. But I've seen those stats around lesbian relationships too. Normally, it's a toss-up between bisexual women and lesbian women having the high rates of violence, and it
mhm.
is often gay men who are the least violent. So, in a strange,
Again, you just said even then you said lesbian women and bisexual women. It's still women
mm,
and women.
mm,
It's not there's no
yeah.
men and men in that equation.
N No, but that's victimization rate, so I guess those bisexual women might be experiencing violence from a male partner.
Oh,
There's
okay,
also
that's possible, sure.
there's also something we've got to think about where if that's police reported data, and if, as we talked about earlier, men are less likely to report violence to the police,
Which is
then
always the case, yes.
two men in a gay relationship, they're both less likely, whereas two women in a relationship are more likely. So that could be changing the data. But yeah, I've seen that data too, and it makes sense. If we are normalizing violence by women, virtually, then it would make sense where a relationship where there's two women, there's not going to be any sort of interventions of violence. It's going to be seen as a more harmless, which of course it isn't. But yeah, I mean, I've seen that data too. It's always brought up, but often it is bisexual women too. But yeah, gay men have notoriously low rates of intimate partner violence, which is odd because whenever I talk about male victims of intimate partner violence, someone always says, "Well, it's men doing it to other men." I'm like, you could not be more wrong. That is so just not true.
Yes.
It's normally women doing it to men, and often men doing it to women. But gay men have very low rates.
I wanna ask you about one more thing now before we leave, um, and it was something that you touched on earlier, and I didn't make a note of it, but it's something that I'm interested in. With the attacks on Erin Pizzey, um, and the other, uh, uh scholars, I don't know what the right word would be for them that were coming up with
Yeah,
these
researchers.
researchers, thank you. Do you think that there is a domestic violence industry, so to speak, that may be finding because they find more money in women and or get more benefit from domestic violence against women, that they find domestic violence against men to be a threat to their bottom line. Does that make sense to you at all? To you and I, as people who are seeking for answers, we want more shelters, we want more
Mm,
benefits, we want more help, more counselors, et cetera, et cetera. We can also go to the whole thing too, where most of our mental health professionals are overwhelmingly women at the same time.
mm.
Which has to add some kind of spice to this mix, that men are not equally represented in that aspect. But is there an industry as a whole that is keeping men out, so to speak?
Yes, rather dogmatic industry. So Refuge UK, which is the charity that Erin Pizzey set up and then was usurped out of, that no longer allows men to work with them at all, certainly not in refuges. So Erin, she was very different. She wanted men in refuges, partly because she wanted them to fix the refuges because they were squats, but more importantly, she wanted them there for the kids. She wanted the men to be there for as role models for the children who are
Yes.
also fleeing abuse, and also for the women. And she would say, how could a woman ever meet a good, kind man if her entire history has been marinated in violence by men? Like they need to meet good, wholesome, positive men. And the men in the refuges weren't just about DIY. It was all about providing that sort of role modeling.
Well, children absolutely have to have both.
Absolutely. But not the case anymore. Refugee K will not allow any men in a refuge, either as a victim or working in a refuge. And often they were not allowed to work in a charity full stop. I think about 97% of their employees are women. So it's not surprising that they've adopted a rather ideological view of domestic violence that doesn't even see men as victims and often doesn't see boys as victims. There's a lot of charities that won't allow boys into refuges. Boys as young as 8, an 8-year-old boy not allowed into a refuge. So just imagine that. A
I
family
I
fleeing
don't
abuse.
wanna interrupt you, but I wanna put a point in that too, and it may have been something that I was watching, with Jeez, it might have been a documentary I was watching on Erin Pinsky or somebody who had followed her, where they at first would allow mothers to bring their children with them.
Mm,
And then they decided I had the ages of 12, but you're saying 8, where at a certain age, they were like, "Okay, well, the boy's out in the street." I mean, here's again a refuge, a place for people to be protected, but boys were thrown in the street. They were not allowed to stay there. If you didn't have a place for them to stay, it was too bad, which again shocked the shit out of me, George. It just shocked me. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Please continue where you left off. I just wanted to make that point.
yeah, obviously shocking. There's few things more shameful than not allowing a child who's fleeing abuse into a refuge. And yeah, a lot of them, as young as 8, that isn't all of them. That's maybe, I have the percentages, I'll bring them up in a minute, but as the child gets older, as the boy gets older, they're more and more likely to not be allowed into the refuge. Whereas they're 16, 17, 18, they're very, very likely not going to be allowed in because they look like a man, despite them being a victim in their own right. So those boys, their options are go into care or go back to the abusive home. And then they'll continue to be abused.
Well, or
And
live on
then
the
that
street.
or live on the street, but that only increases the chance that they will then, like I said, repeat that cycle of violence. And then you've got refuges, tax-funded refuges like Women's Aid, that are actually perpetuating the cycle of violence by not allowing boys safe passage into their refuge. And I just don't know if there's anything more shameful than that. That is absolutely horrendous. But that's essentially where we're at. That's how hysterical this fear of men has found itself in the domestic violence industry, and it is an industry, and it's worth tens of millions of pounds. I mentioned Sandra Hawley, who was the one who kicked Erin Pizzey out. She's on record saying, if we admitted the violence against men is as great as the violence against women, we'd be at serious risk of losing our funding. And I can understand that fear, and I don't think anyone wants to take funding away from women's services. I certainly don't myself, but I do want more funding to go to men. In the UK, one of the crazy things that people don't quite believe is that because of the gendered framework we have, a male victim of abuse is himself classified as a male victim of violence against women. So he's seen as a woman because of our gendered model, because there is no strategy for violence against men. He's automatically classified as a woman himself. And one
I'm
of the
sorry, back that up
reasons
a minute so I understand. He's classified as a woman, or he's
he's classified
classified as an aggressor because he's in the mix?
he's classified as a victim of violence against women. So if I were to be assaulted
Because
by
there is
my
no category for men at all.
there's nowhere to put him other than because we don't
Wow.
the language we've adopted now, we don't use the words domestic violence or family violence or intimate partner violence. We say violence against women and girls, VOG for short. And because there is no such thing as violence against men and boys, when there's a male victim of sexual violence or stalking or domestic abuse or intimate partner violence, he has to go into the violence against men and boys category. And that isn't just a naming thing. It means that there are no tailored services for him, for his needs. And a lot of the people I know on the inside of Westminster are asking, like, why are we including men in the violence against men and boys strategy? And I think the reason is because if they were to create a separate strategy for violence against men and boys, that would inevitably lead to violence against men and boys getting their own independent funding. And I think people are afraid that funding will be taken away from women and girls. And I understand that fear, but We don't want that. We want more. We don't want to take your funding, but we want more funding for everyone. I feel like men and boys need their own funding because they, like I said, 41% of domestic abuse victims, 51% of current intimate partner violence victims are men, and they get nothing, really. I think about 3% of those accessing refuges in the UK are male. So 3%, and there's not really any money for them. That's not acceptable.
Nah, not at all. Not at all.
Mm.
Terrible. Well, my friend, I don't think we're going to solve any problems here, me and you, but we hopefully are bringing some more awareness to anybody who's listening, and to jeez, I mean, I don't know where do we go from here? We just need more help. Men as a whole, luckily not you and I, but men as a whole need more help in this situation.
Yeah, I mean, we do need more help, but I think this first step is anyone that's made it to the end of this podcast. Obviously, you've probably heard a lot of uncomfortable things, surprising things, offensive things, maybe. But if you're still here, consider yourself part of the solution, because the solution is listening to these conversations and raising awareness and
Yes,
educating ourselves to try and unlearn some of these quite regressive, rigid views of domestic violence, and to remind ourselves that anyone can be a victim, male or female, girl, boy, man, woman, anyone.
yes,
And that's the first step, that we have to broaden our understanding of who's at risk, because it can be anyone. And yeah, like I said, if you're still here and you've managed to not close it out of outrage, then give yourself some credit. And I hope this is the start of a longer journey. And Google Erin Pizzey, Pizzey, Erin, and her story will melt your heart as it did mine. It was one of the reasons why I got into this space, because of learning about her. I was like, what an incredible woman. Hopefully I can be a bit like her.
yeah.
And yeah,
Well,
so leave
you're
you with
doing
that.
a hell of a job today, especially with today's modern technology, and everybody should check you out at the Tinmen on Instagram.
Yeah, I mean, I hope that can be the next step of your journey, learning a bit more about the facts. But the Tin Men on Instagram, the Tin Men blog on YouTube, and that will leave you in good stead, I think.
I think so, because I think you're doing some great work, George. And thanks for coming back. I always like talking to you, man. I really, really
Likewise.
do. And I wish we could literally sit down for hours sometime, and rather than these little podcasts that we do. But you're a great fella, and I really appreciate the work you're doing. Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure, Travis. We'll do it again sometime soon.
Yes, sir. All the best, my friend.
Bye bye.
All right. There you have it, my friends. George of the Tin Men. I'm very happy to have him back. And please, everybody, understand, if you're not getting it already, okay, this in no way, okay, was minimalizing domestic violence against women. It was just, the fact of the matter is that domestic violence against men is completely swept under the carpet and overlooked. And that's what we wanted to bring attention to. Now, for both men and women, anybody who is involved in any domestic violence whatsoever, okay? The national hotline here in America is 1-800-799-7233. Again, that's 1-800-799-7233. Always, please, always, always, always look for help. There is help out there. Your local authorities, whatever town you are in America, there is local help available. There is national help available. Talk to someone, because nobody deserves to live a life of violence. You just don't. Okay. Now, that being said, that's all I have for you this week. Please do us a favor. Hit the like button and hit the subscribe button. The subscribe button is very important to us. Please hit that before you go. And until next week, my friends, all the best. Hey, how you doing? Another nobody here, Travis Myers. This one's going out in particular to all my drinking friends out there, because I got a new favorite thing, and it's called Shanky's Whip, and it is magical. It's Irish whiskey mixed with a little caramel, a little cream, a little vanilla, and it's heavenly. What more can I say? I suggest you pick up a bottle. You can have it as a shot with a cold beer, like I like. On the rocks, it's great. Mix it with a little cola. I promise you, you're going to love this stuff. Next time you raise a glass, think of me, Another nobody, Travis Myers. Hey, do the right thing. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any more of my nonsense. All the best, my friends.
Buy our books!
Hey there, true crime fans. Let me introduce you today to the Cold Case Initiative. The Cold Case Initiative is a foundation that donates money to smaller police agencies all over the country. It does this in order to offset the costs of scientific, forensic, and DNA testing with the hope of solving cold case homicides and other horrific violent crimes that otherwise would remain unsolved. Please, if you have it in your heart and a little money to spare, go to www.coldcaseinitiative.org. Again, that's www.coldcaseinitiative.org and lend a hand where it truly is needed. Be a part of solving a cold case. Every little bit helps. Know that 100% of the donations that go to the Cold Case Initiative go to agencies that are desperately in need of the help. So please, if you can, do the right thing and make a donation. Thanks, and all the best, my friends.